Albert, one thing you said to me early on in the campaign, is actually pre-campaign, but you said something like the Swiss had to run a referendum on women's right to vote 16 times before it passed, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And you made that comparison because you were like, we should start running on UBI now, with the thought that it might take more than one try. And I remember hearing this, and I just loved the long-term thinking you had, where it wasn't like, hey, is Andrew Yang going to be in the White House? It was more like, hey, let's get the first run in, because it might take multiple tries.
Yeah, it might be worth zooming out for a moment. This UBI isn't a panacea. It is one ingredient in a larger transition. And what is that larger transition? It's the transition out of the industrial age. So the biggest mistake that politicians in many countries, not just the US, have been making for probably the last 10, maybe the last 20 years, is to treat digital technology and computers as if it was just an extension of the industrial age. This transition that we're going through is as profound as when we went from being fortress to agrarian society, and then from agrarian society to industrial society. And so those transitions took long periods of time, and they were multi-generational projects, and they required the wholesale reinvention of how people live. And so UBI is super important. It's a cornerstone, but it's not the only thing that we need to think about when we talk about how we get past the industrial age. And so it's crucial to have a larger vision. And, part of the how we wind up with certain sort of regressive political movements at the moment in many democracies is because we've left this vacuum where for a decade or more, we've been saying, look, a little tweak of the interest rate here and a little bit of retraining over there, and everything will be good. And where most people sit, that's just not true. Most people are saying that, you keep saying that, but it's just not working, right? And so we need to paint a broader picture of a future. And Susan mentioned the Spark of Hudson earlier. That is also part of that broader picture, which is who has access to knowledge? How do you bring knowledge to everybody, including people who've been excluded from it for a long period of time?
Yeah. So that's why we're working on the workforce development program. We're working on trying to get the infrastructure in Hudson up to speed, and transportation, so that people can actually get to the work that there may exist. So all the different parts.
And also the connectivity infrastructure, so people have high-speed access. And fundamentally changing, where and how you can learn, right? So we have set up a system where the presumption is that you need to go to school in order to learn, and then ideally you go from school to some like fancy college. And if you don't do that, you're somehow like not smart, not worthy, can't learn things. And we believe that that's just not true, that people can learn things. They can learn them at different ages in different ways. And that, a big thrust of digital technology is to let people learn things at any point, including much later in life.
Now more than ever, your kids, again, are a bit older, but I was in parts of the country where they don't have high-speed internet. And you can imagine those kids now trying to learn. There's so many kids that right now are struggling academically because of the fact that now, they've lost months. And we're looking at this fall. It's unclear what schools are going to look like, but certainly having broadband access to me is like a cornerstone, a building block. It's like, how can you make meaningful educational opportunities available if someone, like, they're not even going to be able to plug in a real way? So one thing that you all have been very passionate about, which I think most everyone listening to this is going to agree with, is that, so you have one cornerstone is universal basic income, and then climate change is something else that you've been very passionate about and working on. And so, Susan, I'd love to ask you something that I just saw an article and it made me almost jump for joy, where someone who's an environmental activist said, hey, universal basic income might really be part of the solution on lightening up our environmental footprint. So can you talk about the work you all have been doing on climate change and how you see some of these income policies impacting our ability to make progress on a sustainable economy?
the relation to UBI is a really interesting one. First, as we talked about previously, we'll let more people be politically active and get to solutions for the climate crisis. But the second thing is there's also some evidence, early evidence, that UBI changes people's view of consumption. And the way it does that is that when you are no longer in the scarcity mindset that, oh my God, I can't afford anything, consumption actually starts to loom less large in people's needs. And all of a sudden people go, oh, maybe I should learn something instead, or maybe I should put some money aside, or maybe I should become engaged in something. So there's a lot of evidence that this sort of scarcity mindset that is forced upon a lot of people makes it very difficult to think beyond consumption. And so much of what we're applying ourselves to, unfortunately, is just, consumption, and it's just making enough money to keep consuming. And so disrupting
and
that
to pay the bills,
and to pay the bills,
put food on the table, right?
Yeah. So disrupting that is a crucial aspect.
I made the same argument on the trail. One of my hopes was that if you had the boot off of people's throats, where you had enough money where you could meet your basic needs, I thought we'd have much more in the way of arts and creativity and folks going to the woods and working on a novel and whatnot, and adopting more minimalist type lifestyles, because they would have different goals for themselves and different pursuits, instead of driving and commuting to their cubicle and doing job X. Like, you'd have more people doing things that were more organic.
And we're seeing that now with COVID, right? A lot of people are now moving to the country, and we're seeing that they're not consuming as much as they were, that they're going out in nature, that they're enjoying it, that they're doing activities that, as Albert said, are not consumptive.
And there's a basic income project in Germany that Susan and I've been supporting for years that has a lot of evidence to that same effect, where people really suddenly decrease their consumption. This is sometimes an objection that people bring up to UBI. They say people are just going to spend it on more stuff, but actually the evidence goes the opposite direction.
That makes me so glad, because I was making that argument on the trail. Probably best I wasn't citing like some German data. No offense, Americans tend to like their data homegrown. But like the thing I was suggesting was like, look, if you can actually get the boot off of people's throats, they're going to be much more energized around making different types of choices, and also be more attentive to climate change. Because right now, if you're laboring under this constant scarcity mindset and someone says you need to worry about climate change, and you're like, I'm worried about next month's rent.
Yeah.
It's like like the earth, or this
absolutely
big grand problem that's years away. And then the human impulse is to say, it's not that bad. It's not that big a deal anyway. Like, that's just like the sort of defensive response.
Well, and also the thing that we're working on here at the farm is we're trying to change the mindset of how people view the climate crisis. That, it could really be when you work to be sustainable, it can really be something quite joyous, where it's all around sort of enjoying nature. And
well, yeah, I mean, it's the idea that we have the means to overcome this crisis without somehow all, going back and sort of living in a hovel, right? And
being dour about it. We're having fun while we're doing it.